listening. You're having a wonderful start to your Wednesday. And to my right, left, right, over there is co-host Damichael Cole. I'm just going to stop with that being part of the introduction because I never get it right anyway. But Damichael, how are you doing to this morning, sir?
Shawn, I'm doing great. I'm excited for what we got to talk about. It's exciting time, Shawn.
Yeah. What I was doing was, it was funny. I was taking a moment. We got started a little bit later than usual. I was trying to see the route that the play-in parade was going to be in Minnesota after their monumentous win, led by parade coordinator Patrick Beverly. But hey, we'll get into the trash talking a bit later on as we go into this show. In today's show, me and Damichael, we're going to talk exclusively about the excitement of the play-in tournament. Listen, last night, along with the Grizzlies finding out who they're going to play in the first round, last night was the latest example of the NBA getting exactly what it wants out of this play-in tournament. Plus the fact that the Grizzlies have 3 players in the top 25 under 25 for ESPN, and we'll give our instant reaction to the Minnesota Timberwolves being the Grizzlies' first round opponents. My name's Shawn Coleman. You can find me at StatsSAC. Damichael Cole as well at Damichael C. Both credentialed media members with the Grizzlies. Damichael Cole providing great content for the commercial appeal. Myself through Grizzly Bear Blues, your co-host here at Locked On Grizzlies. So Damichael, a little bit more of a star-studded setup for the play-in tournament that we've had in recent years. The Nets and the Cavaliers, Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and then, of course, the Minnesota Timberwolves, Cat, and Paul George. Just your instant reaction to what was a fun night of basketball, a night where I would say that the teams with the higher ceilings wound up winning.
Yeah, the teams with the higher ceilings did win, but it was fun. I mean, starting with that Nets-Cavs game, KD and Kyrie Irving weren't missing in that first quarter. You just knew, like, man, this game's going to get ugly. But the Cavs fought, and the Cavs didn't have one of their best players. Jared Allen, all-star this season, had a really good year. You just wondered, what could he have changed in that result? But, I mean, the Nets look dangerous. And, Ben 10 is over there lurking in the wings. He had on his nice lamb fit, Shawn. But even in the second game, of course, I know that's the one that Grizzlies fans were tuned into the most. And it went back and forth. I think it played out how we thought it would. And from the perspective of the Clippers looked like the better team a lot of that game. But the difference between those two teams is the Clippers, they only can go to Paul George down the stretch. They can try to go to other guys, but Paul George is their closer, whereas D'Angelo Russell and Anthony Edwards both, pretty much took turns closing that game out. They had options, but great basketball, great product overall. The play-in, I'm not too fond of a 46-win team having to win a one-game tournament to get in the playoffs. I don't like that part of it, but the NBA likes what it saw in terms of it was a back-and-forth game. This is the Western Conference game I'm referring to. It's a back-and-forth game, and I mean, most of the play-in games we've seen to this point have been really good.
Absolutely. And to your point, I agree. If there is I think when it comes to the play-in tournament, I'll get into just a second why I think it has more value than I initially gave it credit for when it comes to the NBA. I do think there should be caveats where if like the 7th seed is, 4, 5, 6 games higher than the 8th seed, there should be some type of clear advantage that the 7th seed has. But the reason that I say that I think this has more value is because you didn't do it. I can only speak for myself. I didn't realize the narratives that potentially could be created from this. We've seen the Grizzlies go from 2 years ago against Portland, losing in a close-knit game to where Portland went ahead and went in the bubble, and then the Grizzlies overcoming Steph Curry and the Warriors, which was a big win for them. I joke about Minnesota acting like they won a championship, but let's be honest, it was a huge win and a franchise-altering win for the Grizzlies last year in the play-in tournament. The play-in tournament creating these moments even before the actual playoffs starts, it's a nice way of getting an introduction to the playoffs. So it does have value, and the great thing is that it leads to excitement even before the playoffs begin in that one-game type elimination, opportunity that we only get in game 7s from here on out.
Yeah, and it's like I said yesterday, it's that March Madness, type of feel. It's all or nothing. And you get that excitement. You get that, that's why Patrick Beverly was acting like he won a championship. I mean, because if they lose this game, they might not even make the entire playoffs. Now you're solidified into a playoff position. Even like D'Angelo Russell said after the game, he felt like they were already there. That they were that type of team, and that's how you should feel when you go 46-36. But yeah, I mean, the product was great. I mean, the first game too, the Nets, the Cavs both look deserving. It's going to be, watching that Hawks and Charlotte game, it's going to be tough seeing one of those teams because they played some really good basketball, seeing one of those teams get eliminated. So the product overall, I mean, you got some really good teams in it. Now, Spurs and Pelicans, that's going to be a little bit more of a sleeper. That's where you talk about the downside of, the play and maybe letting a couple more teams get in that shouldn't have the opportunity. But overall, I mean, from what we've seen so far, the product has been great. And, the teams that that should win have won, right? Like, that's been, I guess, the most, stable part of this, because you haven't seen like a 10-7 upset or a 10-8, a 10 seed getting into the playoffs out of this, or really even a 9th seed. What we've seen is the team that pretty much people project to win has won.
Agree completely. And the other thing is, though, is that this also builds a little bit of momentum for these play-in teams, and that's what makes game one so critical, especially in these 2 versus 7 matchups, which we'll talk about in a minute. I think one of the biggest things that comes away from this potential Memphis-Minnesota series is game one, because Minnesota's going to switch on the road, but you get a big boost from Minnesota knowing that with Karl Anthony Towns basically not being a factor to the level he was expected to be at all, they still were able to overcome a very good defensive team led by Paul George in the Clippers due to the efforts of a D'Angelo Russell, due to the efforts of an Anthony Edwards. And the Nets, for instance, they were able to rely on one of the reasons why people think they can be championship contenders. My point that I'm getting at is that the play-in tournament also allows for these lower seeds to have a point of reference, have that morale boost as to what led them to victories that could lead to them getting surprise game one victories that really could put them in a good position to take that momentum through round one.
For sure. And, watching that Timberwolves team, I talked about how they struggled, down the stretch they started the second half looking like one of the better teams in the West, one of the better teams in the NBA. And then towards the end of the season, they didn't finish as strong. And you wonder how that would carry over into this game. But it looks like they're flipping it back to the team we saw earlier out of the All-Star break. And if you get that team now, the Grizzlies, you talk about the rust factor. At the end of the day, you get a whole week off, basically. There's going to be some type of rust there. Maybe it could be very minimal. Maybe it's, very minimal. But there's going to be some less. Like that break is almost the equivalent of coming out of an All-Star break and playing, that first game. Whereas this team, as you just mentioned, they'll be a little fresher. I mean, they played a game on a Tuesday, and they'll get, Wednesday, Thursday, and they'll probably fly in on Friday, and they'll be in Memphis for the game on Saturday. So it's interesting to see how that plays out as well. But Shawn, I'm excited about this series.
And I also think that one thing that plays into the Grizzlies' factor is, listen, in this situation, they get the unique perspective of they've been there before. They know what Minnesota is going to be riding on from the impact that last year helped out. When the Grizzlies won game one against the Utah Jazz, now when Jazz got everybody back, Grizzlies didn't really have that chance. But this time around, the Grizzlies are in the position to win. We'll discuss that in just a moment. But before we do, I want to talk with you about Shady Rays. Now, we talk about, the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Memphis Grizzlies having such bright futures that you want to put on your sunglasses. I had to throw in the dad joke, but Shady Rays is an independent sunglasses company that gives you the features of $200 sunglasses for a fraction of the price. That means polarized lenses, well-constructed durable frames, and premium high-end finishes. Also, something you won't find anywhere else is Shady Rays' insane protection program. It includes lost and broken protection on every pair. They will send you a brand new pair if you lose them, no matter what happened. Give them a try, and if you don't love them, you'll pay nothing. It's as simple as that. Plus, 10 meals are donated to fight hunger in America when you shop with Shady Rays exclusively for Locked On listeners. Head to ShadyRays.com. Use the promo code Locked On to get 50% off 2 or more pairs of polarized sunglasses. That's code Locked On for their best pair of the season. 50% off 2 or more pairs of Shady Rays sunglasses, backed by over 150,000 verified 5-star reviews. We want to thank you for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen of the day. And make sure you check out the Locked On NBA podcast. All the latest that's going on around the league with the play-in tournament and the playoffs gearing up. Make sure you check out the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. So, Damichael, we also had, some fun off-the-court narrative to certainly talk about. ESPN's top 25 under 25. And every year it seems like that, these rankings are more geared towards starting conversation than they are of actually being accurate. But the Grizzlies are well represented. Many saying right now the Grizzlies have probably the best young core in the NBA. But the Grizzlies, I believe they were the only team on this list, if I was correct. Well, I think a few other teams actually had 3 players as well. I think Cleveland, for instance, had 3 players. But the Grizzlies come in with Ja Morant being third on this list behind Luka Doncic and Jason Tatum. And then Desmond Bane at 17 and Jaren Jackson Jr. at 25. Now, I've got a, like where Ja lands, little bit of, questions about where Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. are. But your initial thoughts to the Grizzlies being well represented on this 25 under 25 list that many of us expected throughout much of the season.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at, the reactions, and I think a lot of Grizzlies fans were kind of surprised that Jaren Jackson was above Desmond Bane. But I see it right now. And I'm going to say, because from what we saw this season, I think Desmond Bane had the better season overall of the 2 players, just from a consistency perspective, just from, he's not the defender that, Jaren Jackson is, but he is, his offense more than makes up for it. And he did so much on offense. I mean, we talked about how he picked up the playmaking role when Tyus Jones was out or when Ja Morant was out. But I mean, they have one of the better young cores in the league, and it's sustainable what they have. And the thing about Jaren Jackson, he barely makes the list, but his ceiling is one of the highest on the entire list, in my opinion. Just, we see it from time to time, Shawn, when he dribbles the ball up the court and does his, Euro step and spin move. If he develops those things consistently, along with the defense that he has, and he continues to, those foul numbers continue to go in the right direction like they've shown this season, he'll eventually pass over, Desmond Bane and, other guys on that list again. But right now, I think it's pretty accurate from the Grizzlies' perspective. Desmond Bane, I thought he'd land in that 17, 15 range. You look at just the sophomore class in general, he's already trending towards that top 5 of that sophomore group, and Jaren Jackson as well. So, it was a very good showing. Of course, we knew Ja would be where he was. That's no surprise.
Agreed. And I saw many people had the opinion that Jaren Jackson Jr. should have been higher. And I do agree. At the end of the day, offensive upside, offensive production, offensive value in today's game, there should be more value attributed to that type of potential than there is defensive potential, no doubt at all. Two-way potential is something that stands out as well. But when you look at the back, 4, 5, 6, 7 of this list, I think that Jaren Jackson Jr., if you want to put Desmond Bane over him right now, I don't really have any qualms with that. But I do think that one thing that is underrated is that it's not just that Jaren Jackson Jr. right now is showing more impact defensively than he is offensively. The one thing that I think is being underrated is that we're not just talking about Jaren potentially showing flashes as a difference maker. This is a legit defensive player of the year candidate, a top 5 defensive player this year at the age of 22. So it's not just that he has more defensive potential than offensive potential, but it's to the level of him being an elite defender that a lot of these players ahead of him, they're not to that level offensively or defensively as of yet. That's why I think that he definitely should be higher. We're talking about the Grizzlies being the one team on there here that legitimately has a top 10 MVP, top 1 or 2, top first or second All-NBA player because of his offense in Ja Morant, and an all-defensive player as well. That's why I think the defensive upside may be underrated a bit when it comes to Jaren Jackson Jr.
I can see that. I mean, that's a very good point. It's basically saying that with Jaren Jackson Jr., he has a skill that he's elite at. Whereas if you look, I don't have the list in front of me, but if you look at the list, in that 24 to 17, 15 to 25 range, there are a lot of guys in there that don't have, just the type of elite skill set that he does. They're really good players, but I mean, Desmond Bane, he's an example. Desmond Bane is an incredible shooter, but there's still room to grow there as a shot creator. There's still, on the offensive end. And then, of course, defensively, he still, has a lot more he can add to his game on that end as well. Defensively, where Jaren Jackson is right now, he's in that conversation already. He's in that conversation with the Rudy Goberts, with, the Draymond Greens, with the Bam Adebayos, of the world because of the way he can switch, the blocking shots. The thing has always been fouling with him. And, he's fouled a lot this year too, but he's trending in the right direction. He's super young, right? He's young. So he has plenty of time. And I think, um, I think they probably looked at the offensive things more with him. It is kind of puzzling to me, Shawn, that he's 6'11", and his shooting numbers are, what they are, being that he's guarded by smaller guys, a lot of nights. So you want to see those numbers, with Jaren Jackson basically being 7 feet, you want him to be 50%, around 50%. He does take a lot of, three-pointers and things like that. So, of course, that's going to knock the shooting percentage down a little bit. But I just think to guys like, Kevin Garnett, Dirk Nowitzki, Tim Duncan, all these power forwards, Chris Bosh, who took, mid-range jumpers, longer jumpers, but they still kept their field goal percentage, around that 50% threshold because they were able to get to the rim and, finish over smaller defenders. That's where I think probably his ranking, just if you're trying to get an understanding of like why he's ranked there, I think that's probably the main reason, because defensively, we know the defense is what got him on the list. And then the three-point shooting, like a couple seasons ago, if he gets back to that, then yeah, we're talking, top 15, top 10.
And the thing that also stands out about this, Damichael, is the balance that's there with this core. In that, this basically is showing that Ja Morant probably is one of the top 10 talents you would want to start your franchise with moving forward in the NBA. But Desmond Bane showing at his young age, he's one of the best shooters in the league, probably the best shooter on this list, actually. And Jaren Jackson Jr. may have more defensive upside. The overall offensive balance stands out when it comes to this young core, not only for the future, but for now as well. And that just goes to show it's not just because the Grizzlies have great potential in these three young players, it's they complement each other so much, especially in what you need to succeed in today's NBA.
Yeah. And that's, we talk about how these guys complement Ja a lot. And I think that's like the ultimate thing. At the end of the day, the best player is without a doubt Ja Morant. Desmond Bane compliments him perfectly because when Ja Morant is driving the ball, he even says it. He tells us when he's driving, the first thing that goes through Ja Morant's mind, of course, outside of the things that he sees directly in front of him and how he reacts, is he's looking for where Desmond Bane is. When the defense collapses, his eyes are thinking, where is Desmond Bane? And then he reacts, sometimes Desmond Bane isn't open, another guy's open and all of that, and he makes the right pass. But Desmond Bane is what goes through his mind. Then, same thing with Jaren Jackson. We've seen games where, how he can cover up things defensively, where Ja Morant and Desmond Bane, as great as they are offensively, they don't stop the ball as well as like Dylan Brooks. So sometimes they'll get beat off the dribble every now and then, but it's okay. You know why? Because you got Jaren Jackson behind you and he covers up all that. They complement each other so well from that perspective. And then, like, if you just focus on the offense, Jaren Jackson, just like Desmond Bane, he's a floor spacer, and he makes things easy for Ja from a driving perspective. And you can use the same examples with Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson. Now, as a fact, if you look at the Grizzlies' rotations, each time in the beginning of the second quarter and the fourth quarter, Jaren Jackson and Desmond Bane are playing with the backup group. That's because they play well together. So they play well together. We've talked about how Ja and Des play together, and everything in between. I mean, it's a nice young core to build around. We see some of these young cores, Shawn, and they have talent. They have talent, but you struggle to put the talent together. You struggle to mix the pieces in, and we've seen that, over these past few years with teams who have stacked up on these draft picks. But what the Grizzlies have done is they have talent, but they also have pieces who mesh really well together. So it's a healthy relationship. I had someone ask me before, was Jaren Jackson jealous of, Ja Morant, being selected to the All-Star game and things like that? And I said, no. You know why? Because when Ja Morant was selected and the team had when he walked into the arena that day and they celebrated for him, Jaren Jackson runs in front of Ja Morant and runs, down the tunnel to let the team know, hey, Ja's coming in. let's get ready. I mean, it just goes to show, like, because these guys mesh so well together, there is no ego. There is no Desmond Bane trying to, pass Ja Morant or Jaren Jackson feeling like, hey, I was here before Ja, or Des, towards Jaren. They all are on the same page. And I mean, it sounds simple, Shawn, but that's rare.
It absolutely is. And the great thing about it is that, again, to your point, it's not just all this potential and production. It's not all of them fitting together. It's just the fact that they're bought into making each other the best that they can be. We're going to talk about them facing another young core, Minnesota Timberwolves. Minnesota may be a little bit up there in age against Memphis, but you're talking about two young cores that are going to make this first round series. Our initial reaction to the Minnesota Timberwolves as the Memphis Grizzlies opponent in just a moment. Before we get to that, though, I want to talk with you about Athletic Greens, right? Athletic Greens is our next partner, and it's a product that I literally use every day. Basically, I started taking Athletic Greens because it's a great way for me to be able to incorporate a routine in my day that allows for me to get healthier. That's the best thing that stands out about it. It's a lifestyle friendly, whether you eat keto, paleo, vegan, dairy-free, or gluten-free. Athletic Greens contains less than 1 gram of sugar, no GMOs, no nasty chemicals or artificial anything, while still tasting good. And tons of people take some type of multivitamin, and it's important to choose one with high-quality ingredients that your body will actually absorb. Athletic Greens is a small micro habit with big benefits. It's one thing you can do every single day to take great care of yourself. It costs less than $3 a day. You're investing in your health, and it's cheaper than your cold brew habit, for instance. It was created with the founder when the founder experienced a ton of gut health issues and ended up on a complicated supplement routine to recover. He created Athletic Greens after experiencing how difficult it was to create an optimal nutritional routine on your own. But the great thing is he created it for all of us to benefit. To make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year sample of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/NBA Network. Again, that is athleticgreens.com/NBA Network to take advantage over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. Now, we talk about Athletic Greens, Damichael, but also that great thing about the Locked On Podcast Network is we give you options. You can enjoy Athletic Greens, you can enjoy Built Bar, you can enjoy both. But the great thing is that you can have these at any point in time during the day. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, 100%. That's the best part about it, Shawn.
Yeah, you could have this at any point in time, in the morning for breakfast, in the afternoon as a snack, however you choose to make it a part of your daily routine. The whole idea is getting healthier. For instance, at Built.com, you could choose from over 18 different flavors, your Built Bars, Built Puffs, what have you, and you can enjoy them anytime that you want to, however you want to. Make sure you put in the promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off your next order from Built Bar. Again, that's Built.com. Put in the promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off your next order from Built Bar from Built.com. Listen, we're going to have a lot of great content coming up over the next 2 or 3 days, all about breaking down the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Memphis Grizzlies. And the great thing is that it's not just going to be us. We're looking to set up an opportunity to talk crap. I mean, talk crossover, not crossover with Minnesota Timberwolves Locked On host Ben Beacon. I have had the opportunity to do a few shows with Ben Beacon in the past. Wonderful individual, wonderful mind, great overall fan of Minnesota sports, and great guy who covers the team. He's going to make sure to join us for a crossover episode here in the near future. We'll make sure to get that content out here to you. In other words, so much to look forward to when it comes to Locked On Grizzlies. So Damichael Cole, we now know who the Memphis Grizzlies are going to play, and it's the team that I would say probably over the past 6 weeks or so, the team that likely was the most interesting matchup, likely was the most likely matchup. And there's several different ways we can go. But the one way that I'll start out with is on many different levels. The one word that comes to mind when it comes to this series is fun. The top 2 teams in the NBA in scoring, Minnesota was 1, the Grizzlies were 2, but their styles of play being very similar to each other. The personalities that are on this team, the young run and gun type offenses. It's going to be a lot of fun seeing these two play.
It's going to be so much fun, Shawn. It's going to be so much fun. I was thinking about, after we saw this unfold, I was thinking about I forgot where I was, but I was talking with some reporters from another team, and we were going over prospective NBA matchups. And they were saying, oh, if it's Memphis, Minnesota, that's going to be the NBA TV game. And I was like, hold up now, because you're talking about two of the youngest, matter of fact, the two youngest teams in the NBA postseason going against each other. These two teams are going to be around a while. You're talking about Anthony Edwards, high flyer. He does his fair share of talking. D'Angelo Russell, Mr. Ice in his veins himself. Karl Anthony Towns waving guys off of the court. Patrick Beverley, throwing his jersey in the crowd like he's Kobe Bryant in Game 6 of the 2010 NBA Finals or something. And then there's Malik Beasley, all these guys and their abrasive personalities. And then there's the Grizzlies, this trash talking young core who told LeBron James, we're not scared of you, who have stepped foot in Madison Square Garden and stole the show. And then after the game said, we ain't ducking no smoke. We climbing up the chimney. One of the greatest quotes of the NBA season so far, led by Ja Morant. He does his fair share of talking, but then there's Dillon Brooks. Dillon Brooks is going to do his talking. Desmond Bane was the guy who stepped in front of LeBron James to do his talking. Jaren Jackson will sometimes say what he has to say. This is going to be fun. I mean, you mentioned the most exciting basketball thing. The most exciting basketball thing is the two highest scoring offenses are about to collide. These are also two teams in the top 3 in steals per game. So they're going to get out. These steals are going to create fast break opportunities. So you're going to see Ja Morant in transition. You're going to see Anthony Edwards in transition, arguably two of the most exciting players to see, get in the open court. That's the fun part of it. But there's also the mental side, Shawn. We're going to get more into it. But that mental side, we saw Patrick Beverley by himself. Because you look at the stats, 7 points, 2 of 8 shooting. That doesn't show much. But if you watch that game against the Clippers, Patrick Beverley won that game. How he won that game? The mental side. He wasn't out there making 3 or 4 3-pointers. D'Angelo Russell was the one filling it up. But Patrick Beverley took those guys' soul mentally. And now the Grizzlies, they know what he brings to the table. They know what Patrick Beverley is. He had the encounter with them earlier in the season. And after the game, Desmond Bane said, we know what Patrick Beverley does. Ja Morant didn't even want to address it after the game. They know. They're well aware, Shawn. And at the end of the day, the mental side is going to be just as important as the physical.
Absolutely. And we'll get into many of the narratives in just a second, but I want to talk about an X factor. I want to talk about the one thing that stands out versus this year, or versus the regular season versus the playoffs. There is a gentleman by the name of Dillon Brooks who did not play in any of these games against Minnesota. And let's be honest, the thing that I'll say is this, is that Minnesota stylistically and overall, in terms of how they play, they are a matchup. I don't want to say problem. They match up better with the Grizzlies more than other teams do. They can do what the Grizzlies do, but also defensively, they can throw some different things at Ja Morant. The numbers certainly show he struggled versus Minnesota more than he did other teams. That's just a simple fact. But Dillon Brooks coming in, he counters many of what many of the things Minnesota was able to do well. He's the guy who's going to counter for Memphis the energy that Patrick Beverley brings. Mm-hmm. But I also think that Dillon Brooks has a much higher upside on the game itself than Patrick Beverley. Key-wise is that now with Dillon Brooks, you have your best option that could limit either Russell or Anthony Edwards during a game to where they don't take over to the point that they need to for the Minnesota Timberwolves to beat the Grizzlies in terms of the Timberwolves offense facing the Grizzlies. But also another key component is this, is that if Minnesota sells out trying to stop Ja, Dillon is just another perimeter option to support Bane and Jaren that could really make Minnesota pay because of the different scoring options the Grizzlies have. So in my opinion, the biggest X factor out of all this series is the fact that Dillon Brooks will be playing, especially with the fact that he's consistently been a T-Wolves killer when it comes to being on the court against them in the past. I think Dillon Brooks is the biggest X factor overall in this series.
You know what, Shawn? I agree. I agree with that. There's so many different players.
Now, Damichael, I don't mean to interrupt real quickly. You act like that the point that I made was rare for me to be right. I'm not necessarily, I don't know if I appreciate that or not. 6% of the time, every time I'm right, Damichael. You should be used to that.
And that's why I was so surprised to agree with you, Shawn. I mean, I didn't know if you would say Santi Aldama would be, the key to the series. But I agree because Dylan Brooks, you mentioned, he didn't play in those 4 games. And there's this whole talk about who should he guard? Should he guard D'Angelo Russell? Should he get Anthony Edwards? Should he just get the hot hand? I think you just throw him on D'Angelo Russell and deal with Anthony Edwards. D'Angelo Russell toasted the Grizzlies this season. We saw it, Shawn, in that last meeting. What he had 17, 19 in the fourth quarter, and he closed that game out single-handedly and won that game in Minnesota. And before that, I mean, he had a great game when they came to Memphis. I believe he had 30 points in that game as well. D'Angelo Russell has been a thorn in Memphis's side. And the one thing that D'Angelo Russell, like I said, I watched that playoff series against the 76ers when the Nets played the 76ers a couple years ago, just to see how did D'Angelo Russell deal with that, because he didn't have a great series. They were very physical with him. Jimmy Butler, Ben Simmons, those guys really physical with him, roughing him up, taking him out of his spots, not letting him get comfortable. If you watch D'Angelo Russell plays, he plays with this smooth pace, and if you let him get to those spots, he will slice you to pieces. And the thing about the Grizzlies is Dylan Brooks, he's going to bring the force. He's going to bring the energy. He's not going to say, "Oh, I'll meet you over there." He's going to get to where he wants you to be on the floor. And he's physical. He's tucking your jersey. He's pulling on it a little bit so the refs can't see it. All of that stuff that's going to wear a player down. I think you just throw him on D'Angelo Russell. If Anthony Edwards goes for 40, as long as you're taking D'Angelo Russell out of the game, I mean, you can deal with that, because I think you can. He's the one guy, because he's going to have the ball in his hands the most. So even when he's not scoring, he's the playmaker. Anthony Edwards isn't much of a playmaker at this point of his career. I think D'Angelo Russell is the biggest key. And, that goes back to your point. Dylan Brooks is the biggest key for the Grizzlies, because he is the guy who can be very physical with D'Angelo Russell and really take him off of his game.
And at the end of the day, it's the narratives that are here, right? You've got 2 young up-and-coming stars. Not 2 up-and-coming stars. You've got a superstar already in John Morant, an up-and-coming superstar in Anthony Edwards. How much fun they play. 2 of just the best personalities when it comes to matching their games in the league. That's one narrative. Who's going to bring the more energy? Dylan Brooks, Patrick Beverley. That's another energy. Who's going to be the better shooting big man? Karl Anthony Towns, Jaren Jackson Jr., their impact on defense. That's another one. How the Grizzlies are going to be able to do the bench shooting to counter Malik Beasley off the bench. My whole point is there's so many narratives you can spend time talking about on this series. And when you have a series that has that many layers to it, that has that deep of conversation points about it, that's what makes it exciting, because there's so many different things that no matter how small they may seem as a point to make, they can make a big impact in multiple games this series. And that's what makes a playoff series fun.
Oh yeah, all of those things. And even more so to that point, Shawn, game 1 and game 2 are probably going to have their own narrative of their own. And then it'll switch for game 3 and game 4. And then if there's a game 5 and game 6, there's going to be a whole new narrative for that. And that's why, Taylor Jenkins talked about it. We talked to him yesterday at the shoot around, and he talked about, just when it playoff basketball, those swings in momentum, those swings, and you have to be ready for those. And that is something, I think the Grizzlies have made note of. I mean, the Timberwolves aren't the most experienced team overall, but they have Patrick Beverley, who's been in the postseason, for a while now. He's a postseason guy. He knows all about playoff basketball, and he plays like he's in the playoffs every single game. So there's that too.
Absolutely. And we haven't even talked about the fact that the coaching matchups are going to be huge here as well. But that's the whole point. We're going to have so much to break down when it comes to the Timberwolves and the Grizzlies. There's no better place for you to be able to check out the coverage. No, I'll be honest with you. We talked that this is the best place for you to be able to find Grizzlies coverage, and we truly believe that. But there's going to be so many different places for you to be able to check out Grizzlies coverage over at grizzlybearblues.com. Many friends of the show will be having their content out as well, covering the series. But Damichael Cole, I want to give you the opportunity, what do we have to look forward to when it comes to your great work at the Commercial Appeal, really breaking down this series moving forward?
Yeah, so we have a lot. We're gonna do the typical stuff, the prediction stuff. There's gonna be that. There's gonna be the series breakdowns as well. We're gonna go really deep into it, but we're also gonna get into the matchups. Shawn, we've been talking about the matchups. There are a lot of intriguing matchups within the matchups in this series. We're talking about the guard matchups. We're talking about the bigs. Karl Anthony Towns, Steven Adams, completely different bigs, but there are a lot of intriguing things. To watch in this series, and throughout the series we're going to unveil stories that'll really uncover those based on how the series is going, but we're going to have some things leading up to game one as well.
It's going to be a lot of fun. Game one at 2:30 on Saturday, but that gives us 72 hours of great coverage to really break down this series, and we're going to have all that for you here on Locked On Grizzlies. Can't thank you enough for joining us for this edition of the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. For Damichael Cole, my name's Shawn Coleman. Find me at StatsSAC, Damichael at Damichael C, the show at Locked On Grizz, free on all platforms where podcasts are available, and right here on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button below. Until tomorrow, we'll be with you again talking all things Grizzlies and Timberwolves as the NBA playoffs are now upon us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you again soon here on the Locked On Grizzlies podcast.